if the Europeans are left exposed as the United States abandons Ukraine, that means that the United States has left Europe also facing China, North Korea. I mean, more than 10,000 North Korean troops fighting in Europe.
Fiona Hill, we're here to, in a sense, celebrate the defeat of tyranny. Mussolini dead and gone. Hitler dead and gone. The Japanese imperial government about to be dead and gone. All things that happened 80 years ago. And yet as we celebrate these great triumphs, particularly for Western democracies, don't we now face a new alliance of autocrats? Aren't we now back in an age of autocracy?
I think we are, Andrew, absolutely. But of course, we've taken some strange twists and turns on the way to that predicament that we find ourselves again, because we're also seeing some very disturbing trends in the United States and, of course, elsewhere in Europe, where the memory of that period and the rise of autocratic, authoritarian states and reactionary and ultimately predatory political movements seems to have been forgotten. We've just come out of elections in Germany, in which a rather weak coalition has emerged, but the Alternative for Deutschland, which the German government and their security services have basically declared to be a highly extremist party, has won the majority of the votes in first past the post elections in the whole of the former states of East Germany, as well as in a couple of other areas in former West Germany. Of course, we've got all kinds of other movements in France and here in the UK. And of course, Donald Trump himself in the United States has taken a really rather dramatic turn away from what we've seen for 80 years as being the trajectory, and we've relied upon that, of the United States to be the guarantor and the underpinning pillar of democracy, democratic states, the transatlantic alliance, and is in the process of trying to forge himself as a king. He said that himself. On the White House websites, we've got the most bizarre display of memes about Donald Trump, sometimes as the Pope, but he has declared himself almost as the King of America in what is rapidly resembling the outlines and the form of an autocratic system.
Well, it sounds like what you're saying is that these days the threat of the autocrats or of autocracy isn't just external, as it was 80 years ago as well. It's internal.
Yes, and the reason for this, of course, is that people feel extraordinarily dissatisfied. Many people do, not the whole population, of course, but with the state of affairs, because we've gone, just as we did in the run-up to World War I and World War II, through some dramatic changes. And if you think about the United States over the last 25 years in particular, after the 9/11 terrorist attacks, you've had interventions in Iraq, you've had interventions in Afghanistan, obviously just before that, so overextension in wars. You've had all kinds of economic upheaval, the financial crisis of 2008, 2009, which really hit people extraordinarily hard. You've had COVID, and you've had massive demographic change on top of this economic change and this dislocation. And on top of that, of course, you've got climate change, which is being denied, obviously, in the United States, but is very evident nonetheless in terms of its effects. And technological change. We've got information, basically a landscape now that looks nothing like it did 80 years ago, and is actually accelerating that process of grievance because of social media, and those become tools in the hands of people who would like to become autocrats as well. Trump is extraordinarily effective, as the propagandist authoritarian states were before him, in deploying and weaponizing information.
Former German defense minister, she's now president of the European Commission, Ursula von der Leyen. She says, quote, "The West as we knew it no longer exists."
She's correct, because it's the end of Pax Americana. I mean, if we think about the end of the Cold War, the United States stood alone for several decades as the sole superpower, as the country that everybody looked to for global leadership. And again, over the course of this last 25 years since the 9/11 terrorist attacks, that's become less and less the case. And, I would say it's not just, obviously, President Trump. He is a symptom of a very long trend.
He speeds things up a little bit.
He's accelerated everything. I mean, he's an accelerant for the kinds of changes. The United States has gone under dramatic, extraordinary change. And frankly, Europe should have recognised this a long time ago and done more to address it.
Well, does this mean that Europe, perhaps with Canada, now has to start reconfiguring NATO without America?
Absolutely they do. I mean, not entirely without America, and actually I think we have to be very careful about going from one extreme to the other. I mean, it was not right that the United States should have been subsidizing European security for not just 80 years and, you know, during the period of the Cold War where some of that made sense, but for the post-Cold War era as well. It was, you know, more than 10 years ago that we had the Wales summit in 2014 against the backdrop of Russia annexing Crimea, which should have been an alarm, you know, bell that was sounding, you know, pretty resonantly for Europe. And it was Barack Obama, a president who was seen in, you know, very benign terms from Europe, who actually said to the Europeans, come on, you know, we need to be spending more on defence. It was the 2% agreement at the Wales summit. So, you know, by the time, you know, you get to this point, I mean, Trump has made it very clear, just like successive presidents tried to say it nicely, that the United States' patience in subsidising Europe is now at an end, and it seems to have happened rather abruptly, but of course it hasn't. And that is a lesson that European members of NATO really need to pick it up. If NATO is not just about North Atlantic security, and that's where Canada will still come in, of course, and the UK has a position, of course, with access to the North Atlantic. I mean, the United Kingdom, along with Norway and Canada, are all North Atlantic powers. But the rest of Europe is really going to have to pick up that pillar of NATO. And in fact, Article 3 of the NATO Charter does say that, you know, you have to be able to defend yourselves. It's not just the Article 5 collective defence that's important. And that's really the lesson. We shouldn't, you know, try to rupture the relationship entirely with the United States. I think over time, you know, there will be perhaps some rethinking of this really extreme posture that Donald Trump seems to have taken right now. And there will be a desire to reconstitute some kind of, you know, US role. We're in the breaking phase. And, you know, we have to be very careful not to break it irreparably. Entirely, exactly.
The talk in Paris and Berlin and in London, a little more sotto voce, in London is that America is not the reliable ally it was. It will not have passed the attention of the autocrats that the US is not the reliable ally that it was. I mean, are they rubbing their hands in glee?
I think it's a bit mixed, actually, because, you know, this has been such an abrupt change in America that I think it's caught a lot of countries off guard, not just the European allies. I think the Chinese are scratching their heads somewhat, because here we have, you know, President Trump playing victim in a system that the United States built and has prospered from.
They wrote the rules.
Yes, and they can't kind of quite understand that, and they can't understand why he would want to destroy a system that the United States still dominates. I mean, Trump has his reasons for it and explains them all the time, but the Chinese don't really quite get that, and they don't want to be responsible for the system, even though they have benefited from it as well. So there's peril there for the Chinese. Now, for Putin, yes, he is somewhat rubbing his hands, because this makes it much easier for him to do what he wanted to do, you know, basically almost 4 years ago when he invaded Ukraine to try to take control of all the Ukrainian territory. Trump, of course, is very keen to get rid of the war in Ukraine, wants a ceasefire, wants to move on. I mean, that's great for Putin. But at the same time, you know, that dynamic changes rather dramatically. It's been very convenient for China and Russia to say that the war in Ukraine is a proxy war with the United States. But once the United States flips ostensibly to Russia's side, what is this? And that is actually where Europe comes in as well, because the conflict in Ukraine is obviously the largest military action in Europe since VE Day. I mean, previous war was actually in Chechnya, in Russia's own territory, which was an internal war, of course. But this is devastating. And if we've got more than 900,000 Russian casualties, I mean, this is people who are injured, severely injured and taken off the battlefield, not just killed. You know, we don't know the full extent of Ukrainian casualties, but, you know, the refugee crisis, the civilian casualties there are extraordinarily high. I mean, this is a major event for Europe. I mean, that's the backdrop to this VE Day. We haven't got out of war in Europe. I mean, there's the irony. And if the Europeans are left exposed as the United States abandons, you know, Ukraine, that means that the United States has left Europe also facing China, North Korea. I mean, more than 10,000 North Korean troops fighting in Europe. I mean, we've seen the kind of Asian and European theatres merging together here, and Iran, which is supplying Russia with drones. I mean, that's now actually putting Europe in the crosshairs with China, North Korea, Iran, and any other country that's been, up until now, supporting Russia and Russia's position in this war.
It's often seemed that Mr. Trump doesn't just, he's not interested in a just peace for Ukraine. He almost seems to want a Russian victory, which is a huge change. But in recent days or weeks, we've seen Mr. Trump getting a bit impatient with Mr. Putin. J.D. Vance, who had some bad things to say about Europe when he was last in Munich, now says, I do very much think the US and Europe are on the same team. Some may say you could have fooled me. Should we take comfort from any of that, or is it meaningless? Is this administration, is its head out of Europe?
Its head's definitely out of Europe, but it's not meaningless. It just means that, in fact, that we've perhaps got through to them that it isn't going the way that they intended. And for Trump, again, what he wants is not a just peace. He just wants a ceasefire. He wants to be able to move on. And we saw what happened in Gaza, where he took credit for the ceasefire that is now absolutely and utterly collapsed. And we're in a whole different phase in which the US is clearly not playing a role. In fact, he's moved on to trying to negotiate with Iran. He'll probably be back to North Korea again, rather. I mean, he's looking for a kind of a foreign policy win where he looks like he's brokering peace and all the rest of it. He's always talking about this. But I do think he has realised, and others have realised, where they were being so cavalier about everything before, that they actually do need a lot more participation by Europe and other powers to get this resolved in some fashion so he can hand it off. It hasn't been 24 hours, it hasn't been by Easter, it hasn't been 100 days, all the timeframes that he said he would resolve this in. And he's looked at it as a real estate deal. That's why he has Steve Witkoff out there. It's all just a kind of a question, well, what is the real estate that Russia wants to have and to develop? This is his mindset, because it is his mindset. And, you know, when it comes to looking at conflicts with China, like Taiwan, it'll just be a real estate deal again. I would be, very surprised if it's, something more than that, beyond obviously the concerns about China and the economic and technological threat that it poses to the United States. But he's still always thinking we can make a deal. We can make a real estate-like deal, talking about Canada and Greenland, and that's my deal. And then you can take this. But obviously, that's not what Putin is about. He's not just about the real estate. He's about something deeper and much more consequential, and that's where Europe comes in. I don't see why any European country, the UK included, would want to be part of Russia's sphere of influence as Trump moves off the scene to dominate the Western Hemisphere.
And that's the danger in the end, isn't it? That if America's no longer there and Europe doesn't get its act together, we end up not invaded by Russia, but within its sphere of influence. Yes,
and we're also really vulnerable to Russian acts of sabotage, psychological and influence operations. And we've had poisonings and assassinations already here in London, polonium, Novichok, the use of radiological and weapons-grade nerve agents on British soil. You've had warehouses blown up all over the place. DHL attacks. And if you think about what happened at Heathrow with the transformer, which doesn't appear to have been, kind of an act of sabotage, but it just shows how vulnerable our critical infrastructure is. All of the undersea cables, satellites, gas pipelines. Basically 90% of British way of life is dependent on all of these really rather fragile pieces of infrastructure. We could be, brought to our knees. Just look what happened in Spain a while back, when you had a massive blackout because of a fault in the grid in terms of the energy storage and, linking into solar. That's not a problem of, Madrid's or Spain's rather energy policy. It's a problem just of infrastructure not being able to keep up, with all of the demand and, all of the strains. And just imagine if that had been sabotage and it had taken out the whole of Spain and Portugal and parts of France. And how long it took to recover. And actually it recovered because there wasn't damage, like we've seen in Ukraine. They hadn't taken down the whole grid. But in Ukraine, you see that what Russia has done over and over again is attack the critical infrastructure. And you don't have to do that with ballistic missiles or with drones. They've done enormous damage to Chernobyl, recently, for example, showing that they really don't care about this. But all you need to do is a little snip here and a small explosion here, and, you're done. All the cyber attacks, it's not just Marks and Spencer's getting attacked by all kinds of people, but if we think back to the attack on the NHS that happened, the devastating effect of these kinds of attacks is also very clear.
Fiona Hill, thank you very much.
Thank you, Andrew. Thank you.